So 2 nights ago, UK and US bombs fell on Yemen. It makes me wonder why Yemen. I don't mean that in the context of what have they done recently. I mean that in the context of what the recent history of Yemen has been. Yemen, the poorest country in the Middle East, through no fault of its own, I imagine. It might have something to do with the 7-year-long war that was not just facilitated by the UK. It was and the UK and the US, but we were fueling the jets that dropped the bombs. We were supplying the arms. We were directly implicated in the appalling human-made manufacturing of an absolutely catastrophic humanitarian disaster across those 7 years. So when we talk about, hurling a couple of missiles the way of Yemen to try and discourage the Houthis, or as they like to be called, Ansar Allah, from cutting off the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, then we need to contextualize this, obviously, because the Houthis, as we will call them, because that's the name they're known by, the Houthis were not committing acts of wanton terrorism. They were delivering on a threat which they made, which was that nothing would pass through the Red Sea until humanitarian aid and went into Gaza, and Israel withdrew from Gaza, which, until the recent proceedings at the ICJ on behalf of South Africa, on behalf of South Africa, on behalf of the Palestinians, was the only international support in any meaningful way that came the way of the people of Palestine. I'm not talking about Hamas, I'm talking about the people of Palestine. And the bombs that fell on Yemen don't represent anything other than the complete blind profit motive, the complete allegiance to profit that motivates the West. We have absolutely no business bombing Yemen. And then there's the reality that it will not make a fucking difference that a bunch of warmongering cunts who run our country, I'm based in the UK, in my opinion, these hawkish absolute stains on our democracies should be armed with a bayonet and a pat on the back, and we should fucking ship them off to fight the Houthis with their own bare hands, because we have no business fighting this war. There is a question of what this means in terms of the wider implication of war with Yemen. War with Yemen isn't just war with Yemen, it's a massive escalation in the Middle East. So we're not talking about a couple of bombs that are going to discourage and then lead to peace and no more attacks on the global shipping. We're talking about a massive escalation, and that will be followed by a massive escalation in kind. And what we'll soon realise is that this bombing campaign by the US and the UK is all bark and no bite, because we do not have the resources to fight in Yemen. We do not especially have the resources to fight in Iran. There's no way that the already stretched and drastically diminished forces of the Western alliance, i.e. NATO and NATO and the US and co, there is no way that we could defeat them. The US hasn't won a war in a very long time. Iraq was a disaster. Afghanistan was a disaster. And Libya was a disaster. Anywhere the US touches in the Middle East is a decade away from being an absolute hellscape. And the human cost of Iraq, estimates range from 1 to 2 million people died, and these numbers become absolutely uncontextualizable. That's not a word, but you cannot contextualize the suffering that a couple of fucking haughty little cunts at the top of our political system can cause. Yemen is a country that until recently was the biggest humanitarian disaster on earth. So what does that mean? That means that 300,000 people died. That means 85,000 infants. That means people who are under the, I think it's under the age of 5. I don't quote me on that. I'm ad-libbing here, but 85,000 infants died due to malnutrition or disease. And what was the reason for this suffering? Well, there was a civil war in Yemen. The Houthis and the ousted government against the interim government backed by the UAE and Saudi Arabia. It's a power struggle for something that shouldn't have been an international affair, and international involvement in this affair has made it hundreds of times worse. And now what have you got? And what's the achievement of all of the bombs and the death that's been wrought on Yemen? The Houthis are stronger, so on a tactical level, absolute failure, and it has galvanized the Houthi movement rather than destroying it. It will be the same in any country where the US and co undertake this universally disastrous outlook of we can enforce democracy on these people, we can enforce our ideology on these people. It does not work. It will never work. And the reason it can never work is because it is based on a hollow and fucking unbelievably corrupt system. The US is not a bastion of democracy. It is the pinnacle of hubris and corruption. It is the source of every war in this century, and it has it's got the reverse Midas touch, where everything it touches in foreign policy or domestic policy turns to shit. Open air slave markets in Libya. Do we think Gaddafi was better? I think so. I think that the catastrophic failure of Iraq that led us to ISIS. How about that? Do you think ISIS is better than Saddam Hussein? And the absolute arrogance to believe that we can do another Iraq in Yemen, we can do another Libya in Yemen, is beyond moronic. Lots of people think that it's moronic. lots of people think it doesn't make it any less moronic, sorry. It just means there are lots of fucking morons. There's no possibility that this ends in anything other than complete disaster, as it has in 100% of other times that we have tried to do it. So, I want to say, stop. Stop and listen. Take a step back and think, can we improve this situation, or are we better to try and play at diplomacy? Because I say play because it's a game to them. It is a game. Millions of lives are a game to the people who govern us. I'm expecting another child soon, and it puts in perspective the absolute importance, vitality of human life. And we must fight for justice and not for profit. Because at the moment, the only reason they're going to war in Yemen is to reopen global shipping, and they don't give a fuck about Gaza. They don't give a fuck about Israel. And the only reason that we back who we do rather than the other side is because there's more in it for us. It's nothing to do with a rules-based international order, and it's nothing to do with people. So let's stop believing the bullshit and let's move on and recognise the absolute categorical evil that could possibly lead to escalating this war with Iran, with Yemen, with Hezbollah, with Hamas. Let's move towards de-escalation. Let's try and give peace a chance, because we never have. And for those who say these toothless arses who are allowing this horrendous genocide in Gaza to take place, it demonstrates their complete, utter moral bankruptcy. They have no place to decide what happens to our world, because it's our world, it's not theirs. They may have bought it, but they cannot rule it without our consent. So tell the people who matter, the people who make these evil decisions, that it does not happen in our name, not in our name.